One of the key pillars of the Metro Bank Girls in Cricket Fund is supporting new coaches or those considering taking the next step with their coaching qualifications. Last year, the fund delivered an amazing 1,130 mentoring hours for coaches of girls cricket, meaning more confident women and men who are able to champion the future of the girls' game in their club. In 2025, that number will increase further, so keep your eyes peeled for updates on the ambitions for the Metro Bank Girls and Cricket Fund this year. Hello and welcome to the Wisden Women's Cricket Weekly podcast. We've got a really great interview leading today's show, with it being International Women's Day on Saturday. Katya Witney spoke to Lydia Greenway about a whole host of things, including the remarkable legacy left across the game from the players who were part of the 2005 Women's Ashes winning side. Later on in the show, in part 2, you'll hear from myself and Lauren Winfield-Hill. We talk about the WPL, Gujarat's late playoff bid, and an imminent England A tour to Australia. Anyway, without further ado, here are Katya and Lydia in part 1.
I'm joined by Lydia Greenway for this week's episode to discuss a video that she was part of that the ECB have put out to mark International Women's Day, which is coming up this Saturday. The video features former England cricketers Lynn Thomas, Carol Cornthwaite, formerly Hodges, and Heather Knight, in addition to Lydia, to celebrate players who paved the way before professionalism. Lydia, what was it like making that video, and what were the broad themes that came from it?
It was amazing, actually. We recorded it last summer, and I think to have the opportunity to sit down with two former players whose experience is so different to what the players experience these days, I think it was really humbling and wholesome, I think, in a way, just to hear what they went through. Lynn is a real character. She shared some great stories about how their washing was done over in India, which was actually in the rivers. I remember they were on a bus going to training, and they put the washing in that morning, and they saw their washing being done in the river in Calcutta somewhere. So that story now just is so far away from where the women's game is. But it was a real pleasure to listen to their experiences and stories.
So Lynn was playing for England in kind of like the 60s kind of time, and you made your England debut in 2003. Aside from washing being done in rivers in Calcutta, how was your experience at that point? Still pre-professionalism, but how was your experience at that point different to someone like Lynn's?
I mean, we didn't have to pay for a start. We didn't have to pay for our kit, for our flights, the travel to get to training, to get to games. That was one thing we were really lucky. So I made my debut in 2003, and our expenses were covered. We would get a small contribution to our equipment. And at that point, I think we had a small amount of lottery funding per month. It wasn't a huge amount. I think from memory, it was around £400 a month. So that, for someone like Lynn Thomas and her teammates, they were nowhere near that. They were out of pocket to play there for their country, and that just wouldn't be something that could be comprehended these days, I don't think, from seeing how far the game has come. So our experiences were similar in ways, but more than anything, I think very, very different.
We do hear a fair few of the stories over the last couple of years, particularly since women's cricket kind of exploded, of looking back at the past and how far we've come now. Why is it still important to highlight stories like Lynn's and like Carol's of what it was like playing for England in the kind of the last century or before professionalism?
I think it gives people an understanding of how far the game has grown. And I think it also make sure that people appreciate what players before us went through. In the interviews that we did with Lynn and Carol and Heather, Lynn spoke about the influence of Rachel Hayhoe-Flint, and actually she did something that was really brave. She made a stand and she stood up to people in power, which is quite a daunting thing to do. And off the back of that, they got the first World Cup ever, not just for the women, but for the men and the women as well. They got the first World Cup up and running with herself and Sir Jack Hayward. So I think to keep those stories alive and those memories alive, I think is important, not just to sort of acknowledge how far the game's come, but to make sure the people who did it are remembered. And that's something that I'm hugely passionate about. And I think it's something that we should do more of as well.
And one of the stories that Heather and Lynn told in that video was how they found out they were making their England debut. Do you remember how you found out you were making your England debut?
I did, yeah. So I had a phone call from Jane Powell, who many people will know. She's president now at Yorkshire, and she was the England team manager at the time. I just got back from Australia, having played in the under-19. We were over there playing in the Australian state tournament as a sort of a guest team, and that was for the England under-19 team. I was 17 at the time, and we'd literally just got back. I'd been in England for a couple of days. I got home from school and Jane Powell gave me a call and she was like, we need you to get back on a flight to go out to join the England senior team because they were over playing in the Ashes against Australia and they were just about to play at the Gabba. So that was where I made my debut. That was a test match as well. So very different actually to go straight into making a test debut rather than a white ball debut. But yeah, I remember that phone call very, very well.
What did you tell your school? I'm not going to be in tomorrow.
Yeah, so yeah. Luckily, the school that I went to were amazing with sport, and they couldn't kick me out fast enough. They were like, "Yeah, off you go, get on that flight." So yeah, they were very accommodating, which was lucky.
And you mentioned the impact of Rachel Hayhoe-Flint earlier. Before we did this chat, I was looking at an 11 that you were playing in from a test match against Australia in 2005. And some of the names in that England 11, you've got Charlotte Edwards, Claire Connor, Claire Taylor, Issa Guha, not in that 11, but you also played alongside Ebony Rainford-Brent. That's a generation of women who have really become the powerhouses of the women's game for the past 2 decades. It's incredible, really.
Yeah, it is. And I remember that team as well. And I think one thing that was just so noticeable as a youngster coming in was how strong the names that you've just reeled off there, how strong a character they each were. And whether that's to do with the fact that at that time we still had to work. So Claire Connor, I think she was probably still teaching down at Brighton College. Claire Taylor, both of them, the batter and the bowler, would have been working full time as well. Obviously, people know what Issa Guha has gone on to do, but myself and someone like Issa came into that side and they were just very strong characters and we learned so much from them, not just from a cricketing point of view, but I think just from a life point of view as well. And I think that was probably one of the benefits of not being professional yet, is we had to go out and fend for ourselves and find a way to make a living, not just to live, but also to supplement our careers in a way in playing for England. Because although we did get that financial support, it wasn't anywhere near what the players get now, where we could just dedicate our lives 100% to cricket.
Do you think it's also slightly the time of that kind of 2005 generation? Because if you look at Australia 11s from that point as well, you've got Mel Jones, Shelley Nietzsche, Lisa Kiteley, all of these people as well. And is there almost like a work ethic point of view that comes from that, of this, that was the time where women's cricket was starting to change a little bit and people were starting to pay it a little bit more attention and really driving that forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think that 2005 year, because the other thing with that is that it coincided with the men's Ashes. So we won the Ashes in England and the men also won the Ashes in England. And off the back of that, we got a huge amount of publicity. And so I think that catapulted women's cricket probably slightly more quickly than if we hadn't have won the Ashes over in England, and it put us in the spotlight a little bit more. But if we hadn't have won the Ashes, I think we would have still been doing, working as we were, trying to make a living and obviously subsidising what we were doing on the cricket pitch as well. So yeah, I think that cohort of both the England and the Australian sides, I think, were reflective of where the game was at. As I say, we had to fend for ourselves, we had to make our own living, and yeah, looking at those Australian names as well, people in that side have gone on to do phenomenal things. Mel Jones obviously is in the media. Shelley Nietzsche is now the head coach of the Australian women's team. So yeah, for whatever reason, out of that sort of year and years either side of that, there were some real great people who have come out of that and are doing brilliant things in the women's game.
And talking about your own career after England, you've written a book which came out a couple of years ago called Women and Girls Cricket: How Can We Grow the Game Together? You've done some coaching in the WPL, media work. What drives you behind that?
Oh, lots of different things. I think the book and the coaching that I do, I think, is of a passion of helping to grow the game. Certainly at the grassroots level, where I go into schools a lot still. I coach at clubs as well. A lot of what we do is trying to upskill the teachers and the coaches. I think that's because what we're seeing in schools now is rounders has been dropped from the summer curriculum, and cricket is taking over, and we're just seeing a lot of teachers who aren't necessarily equipped or prepared yet to go and deliver the game. So that's a massive passion of mine, working with the coaches and the teachers. But then at the elite level, obviously, I've been lucky enough to work over in the Women's Big Bash with the Sydney Sixers, and more recently with the Mumbai Indians. And that for me is just to work with the best players in the world, is an absolute pleasure, and to try and help them in some way. That's the challenge, I think, is when you're working at that level, is how can you help them? What can you do to drive the environment that helps them get the best out of themselves? And so, yeah, I think working across the spectrum, I think, gives me the variety that drives me. And yeah, I feel really lucky to be in that position. And obviously with the media work as well, I think you can get a lot of insight actually into the game just by working, for Sky and the BBC.
And after that 2005 generation that we discussed, it took nearly another 10 years for central contracts to be introduced. And you were one of the first tranche of players that received those contracts, albeit 10 years into your international career at that point. How did life change for you after that was introduced?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time, I remember there was a lot of talk about it in the media, and the expectation suddenly shifted. So suddenly, because we were getting paid money, the media expected us to go out and be world beaters. And it couldn't have gone any worse. I think we had a test match against India, and this was our first game as professional cricketers, and we lost the test match. And so I think the one thing that did change was the criticism that we got from the media was, you're professional cricketers, you should be performing. But the reality was we needed a couple of years to get used to what being a professional cricketer demanded of you, and that did take a bit of time. So I think that was probably the biggest shift, was just the expectations that we received externally, but then also I think internally as a group we expected a lot more of ourselves. We thought to ourselves, right, we're being given this privilege of being full-time at what we love doing, so we have to make sure that we perform. And so I think that expectation of ourselves suddenly increased a lot even more. And so, yeah, those two hand in hand, the expectation from media and then within our group, I think that was the biggest shift that we saw, which was, I guess an obvious one, really.
Do you ever feel jealous of what the players have now coming through? You said you were a professional 10 years into your international career. Now there's, 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds getting these contracts. Do you ever kind of think what could have been if you were like born 10 years later or something?
No, I don't think jealous is the right word. I think I would have loved to have tested myself in the international environment as it is now. I'd love to be playing in the WPL, because I just think that is a phenomenal tournament. Same for the Big Bash as well. So I don't actually feel any jealousy from that regard. I think what I feel overridingly is a sense of pride in how far the game's come. I don't envy the criticism that the players get now. Obviously, I'm someone who has to criticise the players in my role in the media, and that I don't always feel comfortable doing that, but the players have to get used to it. The players can't get away with things now. I think back to me as a 17, 18-year-old, and, we would have been doing some of the stuff that the girls are getting criticised for, but it probably went under the radar a little bit more. And so I think those youngsters now have to learn very, very quickly what you can and can't get away with in international sport and being a professional sports person. So yeah, I think for that reason, I got the best of all the worlds. I got the complete amateur, then the semi-professional, and then a couple of years of being a professional cricketer. So yeah, I'm more than happy with that.
But during your career, was there ever a frustration that it wasn't changing quick enough?
Yes, yeah, there was. And I think that came down to something I think in women's sport we've been brought up to, or just a belief that we feel we have to have is whenever we're given something, I think we have to feel grateful for it, even though it might not be what we deserve. So I think that's a challenge that I think women's sport has had, is being grateful for things. But actually, when you look at it, we should have been getting a bit more. And so I think it's only recently with the PCA, who I think have been brilliant, they really push now for the ECB to be giving the players what they deserve. And I don't think that happened in the past. I think the ECB probably not got away with things, but I don't think we as players and perhaps working with the PCA push the ECB enough. But I think that's happening now, and I think the players are getting what you would expect a professional sports person to get. So yeah, that it would have been a frustration at the time, but I don't think we felt empowered enough to do anything about it, which clearly the players feel that a lot more now.
And speaking about empowerment, as mentioned before, we're doing this feature for International Women's Day. Why is International Women's Day important?
I think again, it's one of the, as a groups of sportswomen and women in general, we're still in the minority a lot of the time. We're still women working in men's world, male dominated worlds. And I think the fact that International Women's Day is a day, I think speaks volumes of that exact situation. It still has to be highlighted that women need to be celebrated. They need to be given opportunities to break into what has been such a male-dominated world in all industries. So I think that's why it's so important. And hopefully over time we won't need this type of day. It will just be women get the opportunities that they deserve. But yeah, it's clearly still an important day to celebrate.
How do we get to that point in cricket then, particularly? Where does cricket still need to go, or women's cricket in particular, to get to the point where we don't need International Women's Day to kind of empower women and make women feel a part of a game that they might not necessarily always feel a part of in day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's making like female representation the norm. So whether it's the umpires that we now see coaching men, umpiring in men's games, that needs to go across to other areas. Coaching, I think, is a big one. I think there's only Sarah Taylor at the moment who is in the men's game. It can work both ways. You see so many men coaching in the women's game. It's no different to teaching. You get men and women teachers, and that's the same in I guess universities as well. When you go to people who are lecturers, I don't think it should be any different to the men's and women's game. But in sport, it is. For some reason, it is very, very different. So I think until we get sort of fair representation of female working across the board, I don't think we can sort of stop trying to push that. But in the same breath, I think we have to be good enough to be working in those spaces. So giving people the opportunity to develop, I think, is important as well.
And putting that in an England kind of specific environment, for everyone listening, don't worry, we're not going to rehash the Ashes that we've covered to death over the last few months. But moving on from that and looking specifically at the review that's going on right now, how can that review move English cricket forwards?
Yeah, I suppose that's sort of a separate topic in itself. I think the review has to be done obviously thoroughly. I think it has to be done through a fresh pair of eyes as well. Because if I've spoke about this on another podcast, you can't mark your own homework. I don't think in these situations you have to expose yourself and maybe just say to someone coming in, right, just have a look at everything that's going on and tell us what you see. I think moving forwards, what I'd like to see from that review is more integration of the England players with our domestic structure. I think that's something that we have massively missed the trick on. Our domestic structure is brilliant. People who go and watch the games and follow the domestic games, it is a very good standard of cricket. It will be even better if our England women players are playing in it consistently. So I think that's one thing that that could and should come out of it. And then obviously they're looking to, I guess, personnel and people involved, and if that's right at the moment, or if things need to change. But it might also be they might decide that the people involved are the right people, but the way that things are delivered might just need to change. So yeah, I, along with everyone else, will be very intrigued to see what comes out of that review. I think it's really important, and it is clearly needed at the moment, because England have fallen well short in recent times, obviously the Ashes.
Do you think there's a worry that that review focuses almost on that kind of personnel change you mentioned and surface level details, rather than looking at deeper rooted causes of what that underperformance has been built on?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. I think the domestic structure is a massive one for me. I think players need to develop in a competitive environment, and I think that the best thing to do, and I hate to say this, is look at Australia and how they use their domestic structure and how they develop their players. Their young players are exposed to being and training with their international players on a regular basis. So I think that's really important. I think the way that your best players set a good example of wanting to play domestically, I think has a big impact. So that, I suppose, is a cultural thing. When you see the likes of Elise Perry and Alyssa Healy chomping at the bit to go and play for New South Wales, or Annabelle Sutherland wanting to go and play for Victoria, that is a massive thing. And you could argue that that's a cultural thing. Your best players wanting to play domestic cricket creates competitiveness, and then that in itself creates an environment where your players are being put under pressure a lot more. So for me, I think a huge amount of it lies there. And then obviously what they do at England level is something that needs to be looked at as well, if it's the right environment at the moment or not.
Well, there you go. We've solved English women's cricket. Thank you so much for joining me, Lydia. You can watch the video the ECB have put together by clicking a link that we've included in the description to this video and on the podcast channels. I really recommend you watch it. It's a fascinating discussion, as we've talked about, so definitely give that a watch.
Lauren, first up, welcome back. How's it being back in the UK?
Yeah, it's good actually. It was I got back on Wednesday night, and Thursday morning, I don't know what it was like down south, but it was beautiful up north, blue skies, and everyone assured me that it hadn't been this way the whole time. But yeah, still really nice to return, and yeah, it's great to be back, to be honest. It's always fantastic to be over in Oz, but it's nice to be back after a pretty long stint.
Following the final over the weekend, after we talked about how cricket has stupid moments that you can't really explain, seeing the Georgia Redmayne run out on 97 at the non-strikers end, that sort of killing you guys just as it looked like you're going to have a really exciting finish.
Yeah, it was so bizarre because there was actually a delivery before Nick Hancock hit the ball back to Lauren Cheadle that was pretty much a definitive wide, down leg side. No idea why it wasn't called a wide. So Nick almost got her back up a little bit and tried to hit that one with a bit more venom. But yeah, crazy moments. Yeah, it's tough. It's been like the game was probably well within our grasp, and we choked and threw it away really. But that was a huge moment in the game for sure. Obviously with Redders set on 90 odd. But yeah, lots of learnings. It's become a bit of a thing with this chasing with that group. So it's certainly something that we'll sort of be looking at for next year. You don't want that narrative to drag on too many times. But it certainly has been, a few finals now where we've struggled to get over the line in a chase. So yeah, credit to New South. It's quite a nice story for them as well. Like they've sort of rebuilt, and obviously they had that era where they pretty much won every year for multiple years on the row. So yeah, credit to them. They played their sort of way. That's their style in terms of just scrapping to some sort of total and then defending it with, I guess, pace off bowling. But yeah, crazy moment. I don't know if that'll ever happen in her career again to Georgia Redmayne. I think she deserved a trophy, and she deserved 100 from the way in which she played.
You could tell in the celebration of the New South Wales players as well, in terms of just how big a moment they knew it was at the time. Over in India, the WPL is nearing the end of the group stage. Last week, the table was very close, but there is now a gap emerging. Most interestingly, Gujarat Giants are now in second place and look very good for a playoff spot. And actually, if they beat Mumbai on Monday, they go straight into the final. They've just beaten, we're recording on Friday evening, they've just beaten tournament favourites Delhi Capitals. Harleen Diol hitting 70 in the chase of 178. More generally, Lauren, what do you like about them as a side? Because they're having the success, having had two quite difficult years first up in the WPL.
I like the changing captaincy. I think it's been revolutionary for Gujarat. I think it's been revolutionary for Ash Gardner as well. She's certainly someone that seems to relish that extra opportunity and responsibility. I think she's been fantastic. We've seen her return to form over the Ashes. Really, she's had a quiet few years. You know, even with the WPL, the money that she's obviously got next to her name, she probably struggled to live up to a little bit. But she's certainly coming good this year. I think her captaincy's been fantastic. Harleen Diol's had a great comp, and I think those kind of competitions, you know, it's not necessarily just about your internationals. It's actually about how your local players play, and you always need contributions from them. So I think she's been really good for Gujarat as well. They still probably want a little bit more out of more players. Obviously, Beth Mooney's come to form after a lean start. But yeah, I just like Ash Gardner as a leader. We were sort of banging that drum a little bit throughout the Ashes with Talia McGrath. Arguably at the start of the Ashes, as we spoke about, it was question marks on whether she even gets in their best 11. And it's interesting, whether, you know, she's obviously been dropped from UP Warriors and struggling with form still. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Talia McGrath is the long-term Australia captain, or whether actually, you know, when that day comes and Alyssa Healy does step down, whether you go, you know, for somebody like Ash Gardner to take the team forward, where she's in your best team every day of the week. You know, she could get in as a batter or a bowler, and she's obviously sublime in the field as well. So I think she's been inspirational for that group, and just, you know, that it's just finding a way to get over the line once or twice. You know, it becomes a habit, doesn't it? And I think she's been inspirational. And the other thing is, I think you can't go past, you know, I sort of forgot about it just at the start there, but Deandra Dottin, what a signing she's been for them. I think the global game is healthier for having Deandra Dottin play. I think she's a huge loss to world cricket, the world boss. But she's been awesome. You know, she adds in all facets of the game. I think her strike rate has been fantastic. And arguably her knock today, she 24 off 10 deliveries or something like that, was the turning point in the game.
Yeah, no, 100%. Just on Ash Gardner, what is it about her leadership that you like? I found it quite interesting during the Ashes. I actually forgot how young she was, because she's been a part of the Australia team for 8 years now. She's still only 27. What is it that you like about her leadership? Is it just that she does just lead with the front in all three facets of the game?
I think her performance increases the more responsibility she's given. So with that, give her more responsibility, you'll get more out of her. You know, I know that's not always possible, because you have 10 other players that you also need to try and get the most out of, and what player is, you know, what captain is best at doing that to bring out the best in others. But I just think the growth in her as a leader, I think she manages her emotions really well. Like, in terms of, probably a few years ago, she could quite easily throw the toys out the cot a little bit, and a bit inconsistent with just her emotions, I guess. She just seems very calculated. She seems very calm. You know, she's not afraid to bowl herself in key moments. Like, she wants the pressure. And I think that's a really good quality to have. And the other thing is, you know, like, there's no question that she'd ever not be in the team. So it makes it pretty easy as well, in terms of you're actually putting out your best team every time, because she's always going to be in that. But yeah, I think she's matured a lot as a cricketer and as a person, and I think she's become really like well-rounded and, like I say, control emotions really well, but almost seeks those high pressure moments and that extra responsibility.
We were talking about six hitting last week, and if you look at the list of most sixes hit in the competition, she's top of that list as well. It's quite an interesting list because you have 4 players who've hit more than 7 sixes. Elise Perry's got 10, but I almost think that doesn't count because she's just got millions of runs anyway. And then there's a bit of a jump to Chanel Henry, who we've talked a lot about, and then it's Shafali Verma, who's having a really good competition. I think she's the leading run scorer at the moment. And then at the top is Ash Garner with 17 sixes from 7 hits, striking at 165. So yeah, she's having an amazing tournament. And I guess that the other thing about Gujarat, I remember when I was looking at the list of squads at the start of the tournament, I think the one thing I think you could have said about them in a negative way is that in the bowling department, Dottin and Gardner aside, really, there's not a huge amount of international pedigree compared to some of the other teams. But actually, some of the domestic bowlers have really stood up. And one bowler I really like watching is Kashvi Gautam, who I don't think yet played for India, but she's really hooped it with the new ball. She's only 21 years old, 9 wickets from 7 games. And yeah, her and Dottin have been really good up top. So yeah, I agree. I think it'd be a really cool story if they do get to that final, breaking up the legacy IPL, men's IPL teams that have dominated the competition so far.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think the only other thing I would consider is for Gujarat is that I think you know to bolster your bowling, especially like you say, that's probably been an area where they have been weak. They look stronger this year with obviously the addition of Dottin. But I wonder if someone like Danny Gibson's pretty close to playing. You look at Phoebe Litchfield at the minute; she looks like she's, I don't know, just fatigued. She's making poor decisions. We've obviously seen her slide further and further down the order. And it's almost like she's in a position actually now where Danny Gibson bats. You're down at 6 and 7. That's where Danny Gibson sort of, she can, well, we've seen even in the 100 she can bat anywhere between 1 and 7. But I think she could really bolster that side as well. Offers another option with the ball. Great. She can take the new ball and she can bowl at the death. She's a good fielder. And if you're sort of batting Litchfield down at 6 anyway, is she someone that you could bring in? And I think that will just make them a much more well-rounded team. It's obviously a different story if, Litchfield scoring runs, but at the minute she's struggling, and I wonder whether actually should they move into finals, whether Gibbo's a good option to get in.
Moving back to the UK, there was a news story this week in the Telegraph. Sonia Twigg reported that England are going on a secret tour of Australia. England A going on a secret tour of Australia. It's not quite a secret in that Claire Connor has talked about this series before. It goes back to before the Ashes. This isn't like an emergency trip. This is not like a naughty, you've not done very well, you must go back trip.
Camp.
Exactly, yeah. It's not really that. But what I suppose is quite interesting is we haven't actually had a squad announcement yet. I think we're expecting one next week. I guess, everyone's been really negative about English cricket for a couple of months. That this trip is planned in before the Ashes. It's basically a replica of an Ashes series. It's multi-format. There's a 4-day game, 3 T20s, 3 ODIs. I think Australia named their set of squads earlier this week. This is a good thing for both England and Australia, for the players as well to be doing before the season gets underway.
Yeah, massively. I think it's an awesome opportunity. It's been, well, men's and women's, it's been a tough few months, hasn't it, for English cricket? But I think ultimately, as a player and, as players coming through or players that have played a fair bit for England, like I say, we don't know what's going to be revealed in terms of a squad. But ultimately, you want contests against good players in different conditions. The opportunity to play, longer format cricket doesn't come around too often. So I think ultimately it's a good thing. It's a good thing for England. It doesn't feel like it's a crisis camp. I think, the best way to view it is a really good opportunity to play different formats, condensed in a series where there's a bit on it. It's not like just a friendly, playing a 3-day friendly game in England. And make no mistakes, like there's a lot on it because of how the Ashes has gone. there will be question marks had over some spots. That's just the nature of when you're not as successful as you'd like, then you suddenly become under fire, and selection and spots aren't secure anymore. So I think for a lot of the girls who will end up on that tour, it's hugely exciting, and they have some really good opportunities to show how good they are and to show how close they are to wearing that England shirt, and being ambitious about trying to get in squads or trying to cement places across the summer. I think Australia have put out a really strong few squads. Obviously, they've announced their various squads, and it'll be a good test as well. I think we've spoken on here about where does domestic cricket lie, England versus Australia. Let's have a look. Ultimately that will show us, where they're both at, and what is there a gap? Is there not a gap? Where is the gap if there is? And it'll become really clear for future as to, what the direction that the English team needs to go in.
And you can spin it really positively for a lot of these players as well. Obviously, a lot of the players who were on the Ashes trip are under a lot of pressure, and who knows what happens to their spots. But on the other side, what a time to be on the outside of the England team or a fringe England player at the moment, because the selectors are going to be probably as open-minded as they've ever been.
Yeah, 100%. Like you've got to view it as an opportunity, a really exciting opportunity to, if you're a player in a spot, at the minute, to be really hungry to show that you deserve that spot. If you're a player that's hunting for, for a cap or something more regular in terms of a position in a batting lineup, in a bowling lineup, whatever that might be, like what better time to say, look at me, like look what I can do, and try and get that opportunity to play for England. I think it's really exciting. I think the other thing is it gives the girls an opportunity to play some good cricket without the pressure of international cricket. Like some of the girls that I, suspect maybe on that tour have probably played more international games than they have domestic. So they've been thrust into international cricket pretty rapidly, without, before they've worked their game out, before they've, like we've spoken about before, it's a jump up, and a lot of them haven't actually played a lot of domestic cricket or 100 cricket or franchise cricket before they play for England. So it'll be a good opportunity to do that with a little less scrutiny, but still a really good opposition.
Yeah, no, 100%. It'll be fascinating to see how that series unfolds, and it'll be really interesting to see who's named in that squad next week. Cheers for your time, Lauren. That's it for today. Chat next week.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks to the Metrobank Girls in Cricket Fund and the delivery of 1,130 mentoring hours in 2024, more coaches of girls cricket are delivering brilliant sessions for their clubs and helping to grow the game. If you want to find out more about the fund, visit metrobankonline.co.uk/cricket.